The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, how has the New Zealand economy been affected by recent international economic developments?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, there are a range of international events that have an impact on our economy. Some of those are positive, some of those are negative. The best news on the international economy is the strength of the US, which is in the best shape it's been in for 7 years. Recent events in Europe and Asia could have implications for New Zealand, though Greece at least seems to have settled down for the time being. And of course, the international dairy price is now around 40% lower than it was at its recent peak in March, although this is offset somewhat by the recent fall in the exchange rate. For the dairy sector, times are turning out tougher and perhaps for longer than industry experts were forecasting earlier this year. A fall in prices of that magnitude on a sector that makes up around 20% of our exports will have flow-on effects to growth.
Shut up, Supplementary question, Order. Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
How is the fall in the exchange rate affecting other sectors of the economy?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the exchange rate is now down around 25% against the US dollar compared to this time last year, and that is supporting all exporters, not just dairy. Industries which were forced to become more efficient when the exchange rate was 88 cents US are now, of course, more profitable with the exchange rate at 65 cents. The lower exchange rate will, for example, benefit the ICT sector, which has been growing at the rate of 9% a year since 2008 and now contributes around 1.7% of GDP. ICT exports have grown at 14% a year over the last 6 years and now exceed $930 million. Also help international education, which is worth $2.85 billion annually to New Zealand. The number of international students enrolled to study in New Zealand grew 13% last year, which is the highest level since 2004.
Order. Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
What other factors are supporting solid, sustained economic growth?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Reserve Bank recently cut interest rates to 3%, and there are widespread expectations that there will be further reductions. As well as, of course, helping businesses and families with their debt, their lower interest rates make it easier for businesses to borrow and finance expansion. And we have a number of industries that are in expansion at the moment. The tourism industry, for example, is now worth 7% of GDP. More people are coming to New Zealand, staying longer and spending more. Last year, international visitor numbers increased by 7% to just under 3 million people, which is up 18% on 2008. And visitor spending increased by 13% to reach $7.45 billion. That's expected to further increase over the next few years.
Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
What else has the Reserve Bank had to say about the outlook for the New Zealand economy?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, in a speech today, the Reserve Bank Governor highlighted several factors that are supporting economic growth. These include the lower interest rates I mentioned, continued high levels of migration and labour force participation, ongoing growth in construction, and continued strength in the services sector. Indeed, the BNZ Services Index for June indicated solid growth in the services industry, and they make up around 2/3 of our economy. In the speech, the Governor also set out the bank's view that the economy is growing at around 2.5% per year. That's consistent with the sustainable growth rates this government is expecting.
Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, I just have a quick question for you and wonder whether...
It's not a question for you.
No, it is a question for you, Mr Speaker, and that is whether...
Order. This is
it's a point of order, which are questions.
Order. The member started by saying he had a question for me. This is a time for the opposition and members of parliament to question ministers. If the member has a point of order, I'm only too happy to listen to it.
I have a question of order for you, Mr Speaker.
A point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, and my question of order for you is whether, in light of the leeway given to the minister in his answers, opposition members will be given leeway today in the length of their questions.
That will be That would depend on the circumstances at the time. I was expecting perhaps an opposition question at that stage, but I didn't. Well, I didn't get one, did I? Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Only too happy to oblige, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with Graham Wheeler in his speech today that global dairy prices have some time more to go down, or does he agree with that other industry commentator, John Key, that they'll come right sometime soon?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think a number of people, including the Reserve Bank Governor, has sought to estimate future dairy prices in recent times. One thing that is important for noticing for the member, though, is that the New Zealand dollar has tracked reasonably closely to the international dairy prices, and that has had the effect of mitigating the lower dairy price.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of his comments on the dairy industry, does he support the view of Tim Grosser that the government should only sign the TPP if there is, quote, commercially meaningful access for the dairy industry into other markets? If so, what would that entail?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the member is showing a certain amount of naivety if he suggests we negotiate a trade agreement from the floor of any parliament, let alone this one. Mr Speaker, this government will support the TPP agreement if it brings net material benefit to this country, as every other trade deal has, Mr Speaker. Every other trade deal has, and of course that used to be the view of the New Zealand Labour Party.
Order. Question number 2, Andrew Little.